Director for the House Republican Caucus, and I'd like to welcome you to our weekly Republican media availability today. With us on the House side are House Republican Leader J.T. Wilcox from the 2nd Legislative District and Representative Drew Stokesbury, Ranking Member on the House Appropriations Committee and from the 31st Legislative District. And on the Senate side, we have Senate Republican Leader John Braun from the 20th Legislative District and Senator Linda Wilson, Ranking Member on the Senate Ways and Means Committee and from the 17th Legislative District. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Leader Wilcox for some remarks. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Well, thank you very much. You would think we would know how to unmute ourselves by now, wouldn't you? Good to have all of you here. Appreciate the interest in the state legislature. We think that we're doing important things. And it seems like in the House, a good part of, we're like 23 days in, has been fixing mistakes that have been made in the recent past. And I'm sure glad that we're doing that for a couple of reasons. First of all, especially in the arena of public safety and the long-term healthcare tax, these were egregiously bad bills and they had to be fixed. And sometimes the time that we spend fixing them prevents us from doing equally bad things. And so I'm glad to see that one of those, the long-term healthcare tax, has been delayed. Perhaps we'll have a better legislature in 2023 and be able to actually provide some fixes there. But one of the major fixes is still out there, and it's uncertain whether or not these have the energy to pass. That would be in the public safety arena, where HB 2037, HB 1788, and HB 1656 are all absolutely necessary in order to restore confidence in public safety in the state of Washington. And I don't think any one of those three are slam dunks. It's hard to believe that, in 2022, we can see stores looted in front of our eyes and don't really have the agreement in Olympia anyway to stand up and say in unequivocal ways that this is an illegal act and we will pass the bills that are necessary so that people can be apprehended and held to account. And that's why Dan Griffey has been trying to get 1656 passed in one form or another for quite a few years. We also have seen some surprising and almost overwhelming public energy behind the bills in both the House and Senate that limit the scope of action that the governor has during emergencies. These are not intended to do away with the governor's powers, but they are intended to make sure that the legislature has a role in these. And the bills that are out there are not the strongest bills. Some would like to go farther, but they are steps that seem like they shouldn't be that hard to do. We also have an opportunity to do some major tax reform and tax reduction, and we should be thinking hard about that. We brought Drew Stokesbury from the House Republicans, who's deeply involved in most of these things, to answer questions in that arena, and I will turn it over to my colleague, John Braun, to talk about the Senate.
Well, thanks, JT. So, very similar to what JT had to say, we remain focused on the same priorities we started in the session: restoring public safety, returning affordability to our middle and low income families around the state of Washington, and rebuilding trust in state and local government. And there's some progress on all these fronts, or at least some movement, I should say. Most of the stuff that, as JT mentioned, on the anti-police bills that were passed last year, most of that work is being done in the House, and we're watching it carefully, but there really hasn't been a lot of movement in the Senate yet, nor has there been really any work on fixing the legislation passed in response to the Blake decision, or any reconsideration of our graduated reentry system that continues to release prisoners back into our societies without proper supervision, setting themselves and these communities up for failure. On affordability, again, as JT mentioned, some progress on long-term care. Unfortunately, that's not a full repeal as we would have preferred, but nonetheless gives some certainty to our businesses and our citizens around the state that that's delayed through the next election, and then they can we'll weigh back in on it after that. So work to do there, I believe, but we have made some progress. But there's other places that the majorities continue to run bills that we know are going to drive prices up for families around the state, whether it's food or gas or housing, and we continue to push back on those. And then on rebuilding trust, the biggest issue in the last week has been emergency powers. It is good news to see hearings in both the House and the Senate on this, and the high level of public interest in getting some reform done there. And we got Linda Wilson on the call today, who has sponsored the Balance Act, can talk about that. And while we don't fully agree with the proposals the majorities have put forth, I do agree that it is a step in the right direction, back to bringing better balance and back to Olympia, and hopefully bringing trust back to our state when it comes to state government. Only other thing I would mention is transportation. We continue to hear rumors that the majority is working on transportation on their own. We have long been supportive of transportation, just not supportive of some of their proposed taxes to get there. They've often been regressive and unsustainable. So we're really curious what they're working on. Historically, transportation has been bipartisan, and here we are almost halfway through the session and not a word. So it seems unlikely we can pull this together, increasing unlikely to me that we can pull this together in the remaining 4 weeks. But as I said before, supportive of transportation, want to do it in a way that's good for the state, good for the citizens of the state of Washington. We'll see what they have in mind whenever they decide to share it with us. That's all I have. And I think we're just going to go straight to questions from here.
All right, with that, let's go to Rachel LaCourte of the Associated Press.
Hi, good morning. I have a couple of questions, but I'll start with Insurance Commissioner Mike Kreidler today adopted his credit scoring rules starting on March 4th. I wanted to see if you all had seen that and just get your response.
I can address at least what we heard in committee this morning. There is another bill on the table that we'd like to bring back and have a task force to discuss the pros and cons of using credit scores in insurance policies. There's pros and cons on either side. However, it did indicate that the insurance commissioner's office indicated that if the task force did not come up with not using credit scores in insurance, then they weren't interested in having the task force. So I'm not real sure where that's going. There is some pushback, and I hope the bill gets through so that we can have that discussion. What it does do also is it does tell the OIC that they have to wait to implement their policy on credit scoring before the task force is done.
Go ahead, Senator.
I was just say I hadn't heard about the new rule. It's not a surprise. This is a policy that is enormously unpopular with citizens around the state, in particular elderly folks who are often living on a fixed income, can't and have good credit scores and have benefited from reduced insurance rates for years, now are being placed in an untenable position where they aren't getting more income, and they're seeing increase in rates in the hundreds of dollars. Very, very unpopular. The wrong policy of the state of Washington.
I was going to make a pretty similar point, Rachel. I haven't seen this particular rulemaking yet either, but exactly what Senator Brine said. The credit scoring rules work to the favor of senior citizens. Any study that you can find that examines credit scores by age shows that the older you are, the higher your credit score is on average. So a system that gets rid of the use of credit scoring is going to make insurance and living life more expensive for senior citizens. So when Republicans are here in the legislature trying to make life more affordable, the Democratic Insurance Commissioner is trying to make insurance more expensive for senior citizens and trying to get his Democratic allies to follow him.
Rachel, do you have a follow-up?
I do, and this one's for Senator Wilson. I just saw the release about your proposal to use cannabis revenue to shore up the paid family leave program. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, well, it wasn't until just recently that we found out that the paid family medical leave program itself was in basically dire straits here within a few months. So once we found that out, we put together this bill that would, right off the bat, 125 million would go into the fund for the year coming from the coronavirus relief fund, and then ongoing would be 125 $1 million a year, 25% of the cannabis fund to fund this program. It also requires an actuarial audit so that we can keep track of these numbers. Again, it's one of these cases where this program is very popular and many people are using it. First year that it was, or the first week that it was open, 3 times as many people applied for it than what they thought. So we're hoping that this bill will help fund this and keep this afloat.
And if I could just add on too, I mean, I think this is yet another example of what Representative Wilcox said at the beginning of a lot of fixes needing to be done this session to some one-sided policies that have emerged when one party controls all levers of government. With regard to paid family medical leave, the total tax rate increased by about 50% this year, but the effective rate for employees nearly doubled because not only did the rate go up, but the split between employers and employees shifted. And if we don't do something this session to save the fund from insolvency, ESD will adopt a solvency surcharge that will result in another near doubling of the tax increase. So we could, without further action by the legislature to prop up this program, employees might end up paying triple next year compared to what they were paying last December. So just an absolutely untenable program. And once again, an illustration of things that might have good intentions, but poorly implemented at the state level, and I think should be a caution to legislators and to voters of the state, to the people of the state of Washington, to when we have big ideas, we should proceed carefully so that we don't inadvertently make life worse for the people we're trying to help.
All right, next we'll go to Jerry Cornfield of the Herald.
Thank you. I just have a question, I guess, for the leadership. You mentioned some of the issues that you run into. I wonder about the prison situation, the Department of Corrections, and what you're hearing from folks in your districts. If the Department of Corrections doing enough to deal with the COVID surge, is the governor doing enough? Do you guys wish there was more being done or less being done?
You know, I would say that this is a common topic of letters that we get, and the complaints are legion. I got information from a person who's involved in the corrections agency, and sorry, I'm stumbling because I'm trying to recall the issue here, and it had to do with chaplains. They don't call them chaplains anymore. They're inadequate. This is something that's important for people that are incarcerated to have that kind of counseling. And, you know, perhaps because of political correctness, that seems less necessary to those that are running the department. Many of us have talked over and over and over about the fact that we have a crisis in public safety and policing right now. Instead of arresting people and prosecuting them, in many cases, we're letting people out of the prisons. I've heard from corrections officers that feel like it's unfair that they lose their job if they don't get vaccinated, yet there's no mandate for people that are incarcerated. One of the many apparent inequities when it comes to mandating vaccinations for people.
Yeah, I would just say, you know, I just heard some of this morning. They're down. They have a real COVID challenge. They're down about 100 officers, I think, who are out with COVID, and about 25% of the inmates who have COVID. They're shifting employees from headquarters to help cover this. But on top of all this, you have to recognize they're down, about 600 FTE from last summer, and some of that has to do with the reductions as associated with the vaccine mandate that put us in a difficult position when it comes to running our prison. So this is just in my view, yet another example of mismanagement at the executive level, especially in Department of Corrections. It's been well documented by our caucus for several years now.
Jerry, did you have a follow-up?
Just to that point, today, Secretary Strange is receiving a hearing for confirmation. Senator Braun, do you think your caucus is prepared to support her confirmation, or is this significant enough to not support it?
Chair, that's a great question, and I expect there'll be a lot. I'm not going to make a statement on where my caucus is right now. I know we're deeply concerned about how corrections has been run, both in the past and currently, and some of the policies that have been put in place there. I expect the Secretary Strange will get lots of very direct questions about what she intends to do to manage these challenges. So, and I wouldn't assume that ultimately we'd support her, because we're pretty frustrated that it's just a mismanaged agency at this point.
All right, next we'll go to Hannah Scott.
Hi, good afternoon. I think I probably would direct this towards Senator Wilson and Representative Stokesbury. This afternoon in, I believe, Ways and Means, there's going to be a hearing on the state wealth tax, 5426. I just wanted to get thoughts on that proposal.
Well, I can start. It's a tax on billionaires, which probably will get down to millionaires in no time flat, 1%. It's, I know that in cases, well, in New Jersey, as an example, they had a guy who was wealthy and a lot of tax came in just from him. And he decided to move, and it wound up with a huge hole in their budget. And so this is what really happens. Now, that's exactly what's going to happen. Why would a billionaire stay here in the state of Washington? Why would we have more billionaires not coming to the state of Washington if this tax passes? First of all, we don't need the funding. I believe that will bring in about $9 billion. And we are sitting right now, because we have a great tax structure, at over $10 billion available in revenue right now. So, and ongoing, a good 3/4 of that is ongoing. So I don't understand why we continue to go after those people who bring the jobs into the state and put people to work. And now we're trying to get them to leave. That doesn't make any sense at all to me.
Yep, I agree, Hannah, with everything Senator Wilson said. Setting aside the fact that these measures poll abysmally, you might think that there's only a relatively few number of people taxed, so they should be popular. They're not, because I think a lot of common sense people realize I might not be taxed by this today, but it opens the door to a new type of taxation, and eventually it's going to include me. Billionaires this year, millionaires next year, and by the end of the decade, it'll be 100,000aires, which suddenly gets a lot of middle-class people. In addition to all that, I think Senator Wilson is also right that it's not a good tax structure. Washington, although our tax revenue kind of plummeted along with everybody else's right when the pandemic started, it recovered really quickly. And it's not only recovered, it's soaring above where we ever thought it was going to be. We have a really resilient tax structure, and that's a really good thing, because at the very time when people need help, like the middle of a pandemic, we have a robust and resilient tax structure that provides the state with revenue to provide the help that people need. And so why we would want to flip that around and make it more susceptible to the ups and downs of the broader economy is beyond me. We also keep hearing from the majority about how upside down our tax code is, but that really just is code for taxing people that are unpopular. Because over here in the House, we have a number of bills that would make the tax code more fair and less regressive that can't even get a hearing. I have a bill that would expand the working families tax credit, double the size of the credit for individuals with children, double the income that could qualify, and it would ultimately bring in about 3 times as many people into that program that would qualify for a credit. A Democrat senator over in the Senate has a sales tax bill, and that can't get a hearing either. So there's 2 ways we can fix a quote unquote upside down tax code, and there's a number of us that are very interested in fixing it by reducing the burden on working families. And despite hearing that rhetoric for years from the other side of the aisle, when push has come to shove this session with record revenue, there is absolutely no interest in moving forward any of these proposals by the majority that would reduce the inequity of our tax code and provide actual meaningful relief to the working families of Washington.
You know, I'd also like to bring up that we have 2 other bills in Ways and Means this afternoon, and those are property tax. One of them is a property tax exemption. So the first $250,000 of assessed value would be exempt from the state property tax. What a better time to do this than now when we have the $10 billion available in funds. We need to start giving back to our taxpayers. When we have $10 billion available to us, there's no reason for any tax increases. Just like last year when we passed that capital gains income tax, there was no reason for it. It's just to put the structure in there. And now it would be great to make this state more affordable by allowing our property taxes to be reduced. And it's a progressive. So if you have a house that's worth $250,000, you would be paying no state property tax. And if you had $1 million home, it would be a 25% exemption. So what a great opportunity to give back to the people.
Did you have a follow-up, Hannah?
I did. It kind of along that line, Senator Wilson. The House Speaker has said, when asked about giving back and giving a tax break to taxpayers this session, specifically, I believe we were asking her about Mona Doss's bill for the sales tax cut. She said that a lot of the funds that we have in the extra revenue is one-time money, and that we are going to be more likely to see something pass that's the 3-day, I think, sales tax holiday would be about all we could probably do. What do you say to that?
I think that's inaccurate. 3/4 of this $10 billion is ongoing. It's because of the tax structure that we have set up in the state. It's why we did so well through this pandemic, is because of the tax structure. Those states, as an example, states that have income taxes the income is very volatile. Very volatile. So we have a good system, and there's a tax structure work group. We're going to hear from them again today, but we should be listening to some of the options that they have in there. And but again, we can continue to do this. The property tax exemption ongoing would be about $1 billion a year. It's priorities. It's about priorities. We should be giving back to the people when we can.
Yeah, Hannah, I agree completely with Senator Wilson again. That just does not sound accurate or reflective of the information I've seen myself and the information I've been provided by our nonpartisan staff. Exactly how you draw the line between one-time money and recurring money, there's not exactly a bright line. It kind of depends on how you define certain things, and there's some decisions and assumptions you have to make. But would be happy to walk you or anyone else through the math to show that while some portion of the surplus could probably be accurately characterized as one time, a very healthy majority of it, by anybody's definition, any reasonable person's definition, is that it's recurring money, and that's the exact kind of money that we can use to fund a tax cut to working families and not have to worry about reducing services to people who need them either.
I'd also like to point out that even if the speaker's assumptions are correct, the tax proposals that have been advanced by Senator Wilson and Representative Stokesbury are affordable within her assumptions on what the ongoing revenue increases are. So that really is not a very good excuse for inaction on these important policies.
All right, next we will go to Leo Brine.
Thanks, John. Hello, I was just wondering, there's Senator Nguyen is, I think, still trying to pass his bill that would remove SEPA review requirements from establishing tiny home villages in or for cities establishing tiny home villages. This bill used to have bipartisan support in the Senate. I guess I wanted to know, Senator Wilson and Braun, what changed between 2019 and 2020 when there was support for the bill in your caucus to now?
So you're testing my memory in a way that might not be successful for me, but I think, I'm not sure the bill is exactly the same. I can tell you that as it's ready to come to the floor, we have proposed a number of amendments to that bill. Senator Nguyen has offered a substitute that incorporates some of those amendments. So I think we are getting closer, but we have, I think, it's a variety of concerns as we've seen this, as we thought about it and think about how it would play out in our communities around the states, things like how are you going to deal with water and wastewater and stormwater. Wastewater in particular is a particular problem in many of these small encampments around the state. And we want to make sure it's done well. How do you make sure you have a plan to clean up when and if you actually disestablish this encampment? So these are things that I think are reasonable questions that we've asked, some of which Senator Nguyen has responded to with what we think are reasonable answers. We're not quite there yet, but we are working in good faith to try to find an answer. I can tell you, I have some concerns about going around the SEPA process. We put that process in, and not all of us love it, but it isn't there to make sure we really think through all the impacts from any kind of development. So why would we exempt one particular type of development from all the others? It's a simple process that's designed to make sure the community understands the challenges, whoever's pushing the project understands the challenges, and the local jurisdiction understands the challenges, and they all have a chance to weigh in. That's all a good thing from my perspective.
Leo, did you have a follow-up?
I do not. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, next we will go to Albert James.
Yes, good morning, everyone. For the senators or anyone who wants to jump in, Senate Bill 5660 is getting a public hearing tomorrow. The bill would allow supervised use of psilocybin, aka mushrooms. I just wanted to get everyone's reaction to that proposal.
My reaction is, I'll go back to what I said at the beginning. We're focused on public safety, on affordability, and building trust. This doesn't seem to meet that bar, that this is something we should be focused on in the 2022 session. We have a lot more important issues to worry about for the people of the state of Washington.
Albert, did you have a follow-up?
Yes, I just wanted to also get everyone's thoughts on some of the middle housing proposals making their way through the legislature currently.
Well, I just got an update from some people on the House committee in that arena. If I heard you correctly, I think you said middle housing. And this may be disproven by events soon, but I get the idea that unfortunately the bill that was co-sponsored by Andrew Barkis may not advance. That had some problems in that bill, made some people uncomfortable, but had an awful lot of positive aspects. And I have been told that an alternative that incorporates a lot of the worst suggestions over the last few years may be the one that advances. This is too serious a thing to play with. And I just am, it's a tragedy amid all of the failures that we see in government around us. I think the failure to use the expertise of people that have been providing housing their whole careers, like it's Representative Andrew Barkis, that he's been ignored largely for several years now. And instead, it seems like we're constantly approaching this from an ideological point of view. I'm glad you asked this question. I hope that the event will be better than the prediction that I have heard today, because we absolutely have to have good policy in this arena.
And if I could add on to that as well, you know, I'm far from an expert like Representative Barkis or Representative Dufault are, but I think from my conversations with my Republican colleagues, the vast majority of us want to encourage more housing and more of that missing middle housing. So I think we're aligned on the goal. I think, though, there is not total support for some of the approaches that the governor and some other folks on the other side of the aisle have taken. And I think that the best way to simplify it, explain it, is a carrot versus stick approach. I think most Republicans would be pretty strongly in favor of carrot approaches that incentivize cities to build and permit more housing, but a little more skeptical of stick approaches that take a statewide mandate and punish cities that, for whatever reason, it doesn't make sense to go along. I represent a pretty diverse set of cities, and post redistricting, my district will stretch from I-5 to the crest of the Cascades, and just in that little stretch, I've got three very different types of cities, and I can only imagine how much diversity there is if you go out to Seattle on one end of the spectrum and Chihuahua on the other end of the spectrum. So the idea of a stick-based statewide mandate just I don't think makes a lot of sense, even if it's in support of a goal that a lot of us share.
All right, the last question comes from Drew Mickelson of King 5 TV via email. His question is, the Wahkiakum School District, working with the same lawyer behind the McCleary lawsuit, is suing the state over a lack of funding for maintenance and building new schools, especially in districts where voters are reluctant to pass bonds. Does that lawsuit concern you? Should the state do more about that problem?
I'll jump in on that. I mean, there's a lot of things to consider there. I think the idea that we're not covering maintenance costs, I'm not sure I agree with that. Much of that is built into the funding, the predictable school model, and is considered an operating cost. And I think by most measures, we're meeting that requirement. I think the question that's also been raised is, are we meeting our requirement to help with the capital expenditure of building and remodeling schools? That's, that we have a system that invests pretty heavily, about $1 billion a biennium in from their capital budget that covers that. It's been around for decades. It's always withstood judicial scrutiny before. So I'm not particularly worried about that problem. No, more broadly, am I worried that we're doing the right thing? Our paramount duty as suggested, as required by the Constitution. I think we are falling behind. We finally kind of solved that very hard problem in 2017, where we had enormous investments over a period of 5 or 6 years in K-12 public education. We then had our operating budget, over 50% of our operating budget going towards education for the first time in nearly 30 years. We had reformed local levies to the point that they weren't these huge inequities around the state. And since then, under the current majorities, we've raised local levies. So, high, wealthy districts are now getting considerably more money than poor districts, or creating more inequity. And then we have other places where we fell short. Our investment in K-12 is now below 50%. We have clear shortfalls in investment in special education. We have opportunities to reduce inequity by investing in gifted education and vocational education and mental health and counselors. And I would actually advocate increasing investment in LAP. So there's lots of things we could do. I'm not sure that lawsuit is exactly suited for what would give the best bang for the buck and really get after inequity in our school systems.
Yeah, I'll answer a little part of that too. I was glad that Drew mentioned the fact that there are places where it's hard to pass a bond. And, this is related to the confidence that people have in schools and the priorities that the state of Washington, the legislature, and the governor have set for schools. We have seen bill after bill in the legislature that doesn't really trust local school boards to make decisions for their students and their parents and their voters and taxpayers in that area. And then at the same time, when everybody here agrees that we need to do a better job with education on apprenticeships and vocational education, we've got a bill like 1536 establishing regional apprenticeship programs through ESDs by Maycomber that doesn't look like it's going to make it out of committee. We've had schools shut down for long periods of time, and we've had the governor tell local school districts that they have to fire some of their best employees because of employment mandates. These weren't the ones that were struck down by the Supreme Court recently, but the idea is similar, and this diminishes the role that local people have in running schools. And of course, that makes it a lot harder to finance schools.
All right, in closing, would the leaders like to provide any remarks?
I'm good.
I'll just repeat, as I said before, we're going to stay focused on three main things: public safety, affordability for the people of the state of Washington, especially middle and low income folks who are really being squeezed right now with inflation, and try to rebuild trust in state government and in local governments, particularly in our school districts. So that seems like I'm being repetitive. It's because I am. We're very focused on these priorities.
Well, thank you, everyone, and we will see you again next week. Please be on the lookout for an invite from Kim Wirtz from the Senate Republican Caucus. Thank you.